probably will go back and realize the video is actually published. Nobody's ever actually defined the term or defined the word unnecessary in this. So if
we did. We can go back. We have it written down. But go ahead, Jason. Give him the
no, I'm not
or
done.
I will.
I'm actually not done.
Oh, sorry.
So, yeah, if you could define the word unnecessary in this. Also, the word objective in this, and this is probably more for vocab in this case. There are two ways to use the word objective. One is disinterested, okay? So, disinterested, kind of pretending like you don't care for a while. The other one is in objective truth, objective morality, that kind of thing. So,
what's really true?
What's really true, whether we're here, whether we're not, that kind of thing. Also, and again, this is more for vocab, I would have liked to have seen you not give as impoverished a description of Buddhism as you actually did, or a natural history of rape, and we can probably talk about that at another time. So that's
Can I speak to unnecessary briefly?
Yeah, go ahead.
And
Go ahead,
see if
please.
I
Thank
miss
you.
anything.
Right.
We claim that suffering is bad, and we hope that some of you have some idea that it's not good to be in a state of suffering. Now that, because it feels bad doesn't automatically make it bad, and what we allow is there could be a case where actually going through a hardship could be worth it because it makes you grow as a person, overcoming adversity. It might, having a headache for once in a while might help you actually appreciate when you don't have a headache. And having the chance to make your own decisions rather than God automatically making you a good person, to a limited extent might offer you the flexibility to become your own person and not necessarily be a robot for the good. Those are some examples of ways in which suffering might be necessary and justified. Because without suffering you couldn't have more appreciation of life, for example, or you wouldn't get the character traits. And it's worth the suffering in order to accomplish those greater goods. That's the reason why you do it. Presumably you don't want your children to suffer.
No,
Just think of your own children, unless you think it's worth it for them to suffer, and assuming you have a say in the matter. But God has the ultimate say in the matter. He created the absolute foundations of reality that dictate all the laws of the universe, all the initial conditions. Everything is on Him. And, free will is a whole separate debate. Honestly, we don't think there's a lot of good reason to believe in that. Free will is probably one of the strongest.
Okay.
Okay, but
Hold
there's
on,
natural suffering. Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Am I able to? All right.
Well, I want to answer. Unnecessary suffering is suffering that goes beyond what is necessary to achieve a greater good. So, for example, a deer burning in the forest, what good does that achieve? Or a person getting psychological trauma and they're, like PTSD and they're wrecks, emotional wrecks. What good does that suffering
So we think that the actual suffering goes above and beyond.
It's not good for something. Suffering that's not good for something.
Yeah, we think the suffering goes above and beyond anything we can comprehend as a human being, doing our best to find a good reason why it happens and for why we can understand why it's worth it. But none of those things that you offer, in face of all of the suffering that we can go out and look at, there's no comprehensible reason why it's actually justified and worth some greater good that you can understand what's going on. So we think that the best you can do is say there might be some unknown reason that actually does justify all the suffering you point to, but we're just mere human beings, and who are we to say that there is no reason just because we can't comprehend what it is? We think that you can actually comprehend a lot of the possible justifications and shoot them down upon an analysis of all of those. And at the end of the day, all you can say is there could be a possible explanation for why all the suffering has ever happened is actually justified, even though it doesn't seem that it is.
Thank you, Jason. Vocab, go ahead and you can either rebut.
I'll say something brief and then answer Wayne's question. I'll try. Unnecessary suffering. Suffering is not a material item. Can't be weighed, quantified, or counted. So I don't understand how you could sort of add it up and say, well, this is too much. So if you could weigh or quantify it somehow, how would you determine the line of demarcation? What would the line of demarcation be? I don't understand this.
I can explain it to you.
But on your question, Wade, what is objective? The way I would be using it is sort of in a metaphysical sense of that which is sort of ultimately real, something that is true whether anyone believes in it or not. Those would be the ways I'd be approaching it in the particular discussion we've had tonight.
I bet you can mention
We agree with that.
Here, let me ask you a question, Vocab. Are you done?
Let's let the audience ask the questions if we could.
Do you have another question from the audience?
Can I give a response to what he said?
Well, let's see what the audience has to
That
say.
question was
Someone wants
actually
to talk.
directed to Vocab, so we'll get another question from the audience. Any other questions?
All right, I'm just curious where you're conscious or why do you care that the Germans killed 6 million Jews? It doesn't hurt you. And if you do care, where does that caring come from without God?
I mean, a parent just naturally cares for their child, and I hope everybody cares for people.
But this
Even
is
if
something
there's
that
not
happened
enough.
70 years ago that you have no...
Are you saying that if you found out that God didn't exist, you wouldn't care? I mean, it doesn't matter if you don't
No,
care.
he did.
I mean, I
No,
care
no,
because
also-
I have
also,
compassion,
why-
and I feel
why-
sorry for people.
why-
I can emulate in my mind what it might be to
Randy-
be like them. But if you don't care, I mean, that's your own prerogative.
Even if
I
something
believe
doesn't
that you
affect
care
us
about suffering. I
personally.
believe that, but where do you think that caring comes from?
The
Why do you think
neurochemicals
that's
in my
written
brain,
on your
probably
heart?
a mix of neurochemicals. This is the structures of my brain.
But if it doesn't benefit you in any way to have that
Take some
feeling,
Prozac.
why
Can you tell me where that
The
Why
wrongness
haven't
the wrongness of an action is not dependent on its relation to how it affects me. Okay, there's children being starved to death in other countries, tortured, killed, whatever. It doesn't affect me, but I declare that those things are wrong. Okay, and I assert that there are actually reasons that we can explain exactly why. Now, how is
Without
it?
God,
Now,
why
how does it
declare it's
interest
wrong?
me though? Because I'm party to this world, and I want to know what the actual
If there wasn't a
truth
God,
of
would
the
you
world
want-
is.
Sorry,
Ultimately, it
Chesley.
always has a relation to me. But the fact that these horrible things happen, I think, shows that God's not anywhere in the picture.
Well, the fact that you have a conscience about it and you care about it shows that God is in the picture.
Okay, now
Otherwise,
where did
if
that
it
come
doesn't-
from? I understand what
If
you're
I shot
saying.
everybody here, why would you care?
Now, we in
Without
fact,
just
we in
something in your
fact
heart
do care.
telling
We in
you
fact
this
do
is
care.
wrong.
Hey, I'm asking the guy who's questioning us.
We do
Would you
care.
not care if there wasn't a God?
We do care.
I don't think you would.
But we do. We do care. Okay. And we
That's
don't
itself is a proof
take
of
a
God.
science class for how we can have the characters that we have. It's evolutionary biology,
And without,
there's
and if you
explanations.
just look at
you can
evolution,
apply.
you care about your family and you care about how your family survives until then. But if it doesn't involve your family, why would you care?
I agree.
Why wouldn't you?
People
Or you
tend to
can
be
even
more
go to a group
selfish
of
in
people.
nature. I agree with you, but some of us actually look beyond our family. And we
I don't
actually-
need a God
but
to
why?
say, hey,
We don't
that
need
person
God
is
to tell us
suffering.
that's
Can you
true.
associate with their suffering? Yes, I can associate with their suffering. Their suffering must be bad. I don't need a God to do that for me. I can do it. My brain's perfectly
figure it
capable
out.
of
It
modeling other people's situations and empathizing with them. That's all it is.
Why empathize? Why hurt yourself over it? When if you just look at evolution, that
The
doesn't
brain
make
is.
sense.
I don't know why we hurt
That
ourselves.
would
There's
not
lots
make
of
sense.
brain anomalies that we do to hurt ourselves, and all these other defense mechanisms and
You can actually-
schizophrenia and all these things.
You
I don't
can
know why.
actually offer an explanation for why we developed cooperation, because it was a hostile world growing up back in the Stone
We have a natural law
Ages.
written on our hearts.
There's if you look at biology, right? You look at the hostile world. We faced a lot of forces, and those people who actually cared about their surrounding mates and were willing to cooperate, even though it's at some discomfort to themselves, it offered an advantage. Those who were willing to cooperate with other people, even though it might have seemed to be against their interest, it helps the tribe, and those tribes are, among other things, more likely to go on.
Are
And that's
the
at least a hint.
1940
That's at least a hint how you could explain
Are the
morality.
1940 Jews in your tribe?
That's a completely irrelevant question.
But you still feel bad for them. That's what you just explained.
Yeah, I
to me.
feel bad for them.
You just explained
So
it.
that's
and then
how
you just canceled
that
out your own
instinct.
explanation.
That's how that, let's say, impulse gets started, and then we can continue on. How it might have kept going from there. Now, Randy and I don't have to answer every question about the ultimate, every truth in the universe. Just because we can't tell you all those things doesn't mean we're wrong about what we're saying.
But I think
So I think it's an unreasonable demand that you require of us. All we're saying is it couldn't happen in the kind of way that we've been talking about tonight.
Thanks, guys. We're going to have another opportunity for another question here.
This is a question for Randy and Jason. It seems like we have an important burden of proof issue here tonight in terms of, can you establish that evil nullifies God's existence? And it seems like to me all that vocab needs to show is that it's possible that there's a good reason for any of these evils we're talking about.
No. Hold on, Randall.
And it seems to me not only is it going to be difficult for you to establish that there's no good reason, I actually can't even imagine what reason you would have whatsoever to show that it's not possible that there's a good reason for these evils.
Well, can I answer that, Jason?
Hold on, just because I know Matt, Randy, this is my friend, but jump in a second.
Okay, go ahead.
What we can do, Matt, is we can come up with all the possible ways in which we can imagine that all the suffering we can point to in life, how it could be justified. We can sit down and we can compile a list of so many ways in which it might be justified, and I've rattled some of those off, and there's other ones. And my claim is, although we can't do it tonight, I could teach a whole class on this. I'm a graduate student in philosophy, and you could as well. Any of those justifications we claim, and we would go through them all if we could, we think they all fail. Now, does it follow that therefore there could not be, 100% there could not be a reason that actually justified it, but we're not aware of it, or we are limited creatures? How can we assert that just because we don't understand the reason, that therefore there is no reason? Because you do need a reason, though, to explain why all this terror is actually for the better in the end.
Yeah, but let me jump in here real quick. By saying that there is a reason that we don't understand, that's not a good argument, because you can do that for anything. For example, I could say there's a pink elephant floating above your head, but for some reason you don't understand why it is. It doesn't seem like it is, it's really counterintuitive, you don't know how you can do it, but for some reason it's just floating above your head. It's a cop-out. To say that there's some reason for the suffering that we're not aware of, but we just don't understand it, is a cop-out. It's not a real argument.
Especially when it seems like, and Matt, please follow up with us and let us know.
Justify anything with that kind
how
of
we
reason,
should go on from
which
here.
makes it useless.
Does that make sense? Like what we're saying so far?
Yeah, I'm not sure if Randy understands my question. All that vocab needs to show here tonight is that it's possible that there's this unknown reason.
So that we can't say without...
But it's possible there's an unknown reason for anything. It's possible that there's an unknown reason that Zeus exists.
No, hold on, Randy.
That Kronos and Rhea there could be a reason that absolutely anything you think about is the case.
Randy, he's just saying that we can't establish with 100% certainty, 100%. And I would actually admit, we can't establish with 100% certainty, but we can be as sure as you can be. And what I'm saying is, for the other side to assert that there must be a reason for all of this, they have the burden of proof to prove that somehow there could be, that we claim it's a Hail Mary. You're saying, I can't think of any possible way in which it's justified.
In a different way, real
so
quick
it's more likely
it's
more likely, but we'll back away from the 100%.
Well, absence
We're going to have to move on to the next question.
Hold on, guys. They've had two questions.
If you think that there should be an evidence, but I won't get it.
Okay, we've got a question over on this side.
Good night. I just got here, so I'm not quite sure what all the argument was about. But I just want to say God does exist. Today is Good Friday. We're celebrating the death of Jesus Christ, who died for every one of us here. If you don't believe God does not exist, just look up in the sky. He's the one that created that sky, the moon, the stars, the sun. He created us. There's no such thing as evolution. I'm sorry to tell you that. God created all of us. God loved all of us. And his son died on the cross for all of us who are sinners. Amen? So get to know him. God bless.
All right, they've had two questions at them. I wasn't able to respond. And since that was a non-question, perhaps I could respond to some of the stuff they said. They had a good amount of time, which I think is fine. Yeah. But a couple of things they said. They said, why would they care about the Jews and the Holocaust? And he brought up sort of an analogous situation. He said, you would care like a parent. And then Randy went on to say, why do I care? Well, neurochemicals, the structure of my brain. And Randy is the expert in neurology on tonight's panel, and I'm pretty sure that he knows his neurons are in no way connected to anyone with the last name of Finkelstein. And further, his neurons didn't exist when Jew X and Jew Y existed. So if it's the structure of your brain, how is that relevant? You're not connected to their bundle of neurons. And let's just say your brain was configured differently. He's talked about its neurochemicals, the structure of a brain. What if the neurochemicals in his brain fired differently? What if the structure of his brain was different? Then he wouldn't care. So how is that a good explanation? It's not a good explanation.
Yeah,
it's actually a non-explanation.
In order for me to have a visual field and be aware of other people, our brains don't
Randy,
need to be
you guys
connected.
had a...
Please stop cutting into his time.
Is it the case that our brains have to be able to...
Randy, your neurons are firing erratically. You must stop.
Randy, you had a lot of time, and I'm responding to a few of the things that were said. And Jason talked about things in other countries that happen that he knows are immoral, and he actually said, quote, "I declare these things are wrong." So here's a white guy, middle-aged dude, privileged Westerner, and he goes and says, "Hey, you guys over there in that other country, my evolutionary principles, the neurochemicals and the structure of my brain tell me that is wrong, and I declare it to be so." It sounds like an cultural imperialism as
Say
some of
that
the...
again? I'm sorry.
It's a form of cultural moralistic imperialism, as some of the postmodernists would say.
Yeah, it's social constructionist, postmodernist.
What basis do you have to say that, for example, the practice of female clitoral mutilation, which happens in countries dominated by folk Islam? What basis?
Would you want you to do it to your daughter?
Well, I'm not in that culture, Randy. You're missing the point entirely.
Would you want it done to you if you're
missing the point entirely.
It might be okay to clitorally dissect your daughter's...
So you guys see that if you're in a different culture with a different brain structure, you have a different set of morality, demonstrating that it is not objective.
Morality is taught at a certain level, and it's not just automatically handed to us.
Well,
and even you realize that, even being a Christian. I mean, you're not perfectly moral either under your view.
No, that's
so it is possible that some cultures can go haywire in the fact, and here's what happens. They think female genital mutilation does things, but it actually doesn't do. They think it causes more goodness than badness. They think that, but they're wrong. And once they're educated that they're wrong about that, then they'll change and they become more moral because it's reality.
False beliefs, Randy. False beliefs
tracks what is actually good instead of what you think is good.
Randy, false beliefs can have an evolutionary advantage, so it's not a good argument.
Agreed.
And speaking of evolutionary advantages, he said, well, they find that in societies and tribes, those who are more altruistic survive better because they get along better, people like them better, monkey scratch back, scratch ears.
Sure.
Okay, so using the example of a gazelle, the saint animal of tonight, there's a gazelle crossing right there, there's a firebird, as in a car, driving real fast, and you see that the firebird is going to hit the gazelle. Jason leaps off the stage, knowing that he's not fast enough to save himself from the speeding traffic, but knowing he can save the gazelle, pushes the gazelle out of the way, the gazelle is saved, he dies. What was the evolutionary advantage? And
that's for the record. I would never do that.
Dawkins talks about these issues a lot.
So counterexamples are so easy.
That's your capacity of your brain for compassion. So you have a compassion ability for your brain. So what's happened is that your brain says, I have a compassion for my family, I have compassion for my friends, and I have compassion for these things that I hold dear.
Randy, the big picture
I really like this thing. I hold it dear to me. Maybe not quite as dear as a mother, but I really like it. And I'm going to sacrifice my life for it.
Randy, the thing is, we're not required.
Because if you protect your kin, then if you have an affinity towards your kin, then your DNA is going to be passed down better and easier and more. You're going to have more of that. So that's why you develop that ability to have compassion for other people. And it's just a case of that, you know, in a situation where it's kind of doing a little bit of a different function than it's supposed to. But like even if
Randy, just
can't totally explain that case, and I do think it can, I don't know what your point is.
I mean, just because we can't explain everything about life, it doesn't follow that therefore it was created in the particular way that we're arguing against. We're arguing against a specific explanation for why the universe is here at all, why there's morality or anything else. We think in another debate, like I said, we don't have time to go into what we think is actually the reasons behind why something is right or why something is wrong. We think there's actually reasons we can talk about that have to do with what it's like to feel pain, that have to do with what it's like to feel happy in your life, and that we understand what it's like to go through those things, and that we should recognize when we do something that hurts people, we understand what we're doing to them.
And just to let you know, Vocab, if you want to disprove evolution, why don't you try to find a rabbit skeleton in in an area of rock that's like over.
Okay, we're gonna take a couple more questions from the audience. We've got a line here, Randy. I know you can't see it, so we're just gonna move on to the next question.
Yeah, Jason and Randy. I think a while ago you just agreed that you couldn't prove that there's not a God. Is that correct?
Yeah. Yes. Correct.
We think, in my opinion,
absolutely certain.
In my opinion, it's good enough.
Yeah.
Then you would agree that atheism is a faith-based belief system?
No, I don't think it's a faith-based.
Not any more than the theory of evolution or anything like that.
I think there's a lot better.
So here's the difference between, here's faith. Faith is religious faith is belief without no evidence, okay? Well, what we think is there's probability. We have beliefs in proportion to the evidence. So we think there's enough evidence, then we'll be more certain that it is the case. But it's not faith.
What you're saying then, what you're saying is that other faith-based belief systems,
does that make sense?
Criteria and what they believe is evidence is not as good as your faith-based.
In some situations, but it's not faith-based.
To be honest.
In other words, you're a lot like a lot of the fundamentalist religions that want to hurt other people, or do whatever. Your faith-based belief system is better than all the other faith-based belief systems, and you're the only one who can speak or say what's right and wrong. Well, I'm not sure how an atheist,
if you don't believe us, you deserve to rot in hell. We don't say anything like that.
Believes there
All we
is
say
any
is
such
that we just
thing
have
as right or
evidence
wrong.
for what you believe.
Randy, hold on.
That's all we say.
Is there any such thing as right or wrong to an atheist? I mean, how can it even be, if there's no God, how can there be wrong or suffering or anything? This whole debate about suffering of animals, how does that even come into play? How does it even exist if there's no God?
I don't know. You tell me. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. Why would you even care?
Well, listen,
Why are you asking me?
Listen, we all grow up in a different.
You're like a cosmologist?
Randy,
Thank you for the question.
I want to answer this question. I hope you'll let us know. We all grow up in a certain situation, and we all do our best to try to find out what the truth is. I happen to be raised in a Christian home from the beginning. Like I said earlier, it might have been, my dad was a pastor. I was presented with suffering in the context of my life. My brother was born with hemophilia, and I saw the effects in my own life of the vulnerability of life and the suffering that my mom, who's very innocent, also had to go through. So as a child, the initial impact is, why would God let that happen? And to be honest, that was the single nail driver that got me going, which turned into a path in philosophy. And the job of philosophy is to not privilege any position from the beginning, to give no particular advantage, decree that this side is starting off as the best. You put all the evidence on the table, you weigh it out as best you can. You're not assuming that you're right from the beginning. You're looking at the Christians, the Hindus, the scientists. Honestly, I don't think in those categories. I look at the evidence as I see it, and I weigh it as objectively as possible. And what we've tried
should be as strong as the evidence.
And what we've tried to convey to you tonight is, and I can speak from personal experience, I don't like to advocate this stuff because at the bottom, when you look at it, I think there's a lot of horrors in life, and it's going to happen to everybody, including me. I don't like it, but you should at least consider that in spite of I don't want to believe these things, I found reasons that overcame my initial faith, even though. Why would you ever purposely, for your own interest, believe something is true? Because unless you were just persuaded that the best reasons actually support that way of looking at it, and that's how I've come to be where I'm at in the process.
Thank you. Okay, feel free to respond.
Yeah, I never said I was up here necessarily to try to disprove evolution. What I'm trying to help Randy and Jason do is to act more in accordance with evolutionary values and principles. I'm just trying to help them be more consistent evolutionists. And
that's a naturalistic fallacy.
You mentioned about trying to find a rabbit skeleton in the wrong rock strata. Well, geologists and folks who study paleontology have a name for that. That's called anomalies. They're called fossil anomalies. There's also something called polystratic fossils, which actually run or cut through, a lot of times it happens in the case of trees, multiple layers. And so that's actually possible to do. But I don't know. I hope everyone can see tonight that there's a real meltdown of this brand, this particular version of atheism. I'm not saying all would melt down in the same way, and the sad thing is I'm not sure if Jason and Randy are sort of self-aware enough to realize the meltdown that they have been part of. But I think to those who or have ears to see, and I'm sorry, ears to hear and eyes to see, that they can evidence that such a meltdown has definitely occurred.
Thank you. We have time for two more questions. All
right. This is for both of you guys. So, how can an opinion nullify an opinion?
That is actually an incredibly good question, and very valid, and on certain readings of what I'll call epistemology, is actually valid to the point of destroying the whole debate. If it is merely two opinions derived from certain presuppositions already existing, then that was his opinion and he's done, he's nullified us. Then it actually could not. And so, understanding what he is saying, that's very helpful, because then we see that we all have a metaphysical framework through which we read data. We all have cultural baggage. We all have interpretive lenses. We all have ways we approach any text. Hermeneutics is what it's called. And as we realize that and see that, the prejudice, the bias, the bigotry that every single one of us has, we ask, what is the way out? And this is where Christianity was what's sometimes called a revealed religion. We realize there is only one interpreter of all data. There's only one true valuer of all facts. This is God, because he creates and sustains all facts and gives the ultimate interpretation of said facts, and they are meaningless otherwise. And so an opinion, nullify an opinion, yeah, right, it's just a big tug of war, and whoever has big guns and big muscles usually wins.
I say it's evidence.
Fortunately, as the old proverb goes, truth crushed to the ground will rise again. And Jesus was crushed and rose again. He's the Logos. Word.
I would say it's evidence that one opinion can override another opinion only through evidence.
That depends, Randy. I mean, it could be a definitional issue. It's not always evidence. There's sort of axiomatic claims, and there's also empirical claims.
Mathematics.
Does a dog have four legs, or does it have two legs? If someone asserts that a dog has legs, how would you show that their opinion sucks? What do? You go in the world and you look around. Do dogs have two legs, or do they have four legs? Okay, I see a lot of them have four legs. Looks like your assertion that they have two legs looks pretty false. It depends on what the particular claim is. In this context, how do you
have to verify it in some way, though.
Yeah, it's a really general question. What makes something count as a counter example for something? It depends on what the claim is. The claim itself tells you what would count as a counter example.
Exactly.
And
good point.
If you understand what the claim is, then if you can provide a counter example for that claim, that shows that you have a good reason to believe that their claim is false. Or at least you don't have very good reason to believe in it. And we think that a good, all-loving, all-powerful God, a claim that such a God exists, entails that there is no unnecessary suffering in life for reasons we can explain, all good, all-powerful, all-knowing, and why he would care and prevent suffering as far as possible. There is so much suffering, in fact, in life. And vocab it's unnecessary, we think, even if we can't prove it absolutely 100%, because we'll never completely destroy the claim that there could be an unknown reason for it we can't understand, but we do assert any reason that you propose for how it could be justified, even how it could be justified, even that claim we can shoot down. All your possibilities for how it might be justified, we can totally crush.
All right, Jason, I'm going to cut you off. We have one person who's been patiently waiting for one last question.
Well, I'd like to see if this is really particularly for Randy and Jason, but if Vocab can follow up with a final on it. Randy and Jason, all night you have proposed that human beings have value and have dignity. At least you've been operating on that assumption, yet your atheistic presuppositions have militated against it with your blind and brutal, purposeless forces getting us to this place. So I'd like to ask you guys, given that you brought it up so many times, I'm surprised that you did, the Holocaust issue. If we take your foundations of this blind, brutal process of evolution that's brought us to this place, and we're all ultimately just protoplasm moving throughout space, then the question is, can you provide a philosophically cogent response that satisfies any intelligibility and preconditions for intelligibility for the issue of evil when stardust bumps into other stardust? In other words, what's wrong with biological bags of stuff called Nazis? What's wrong with them violating other bags of biological stuff?
You tell us.
Okay.
The question that was given to you, Randy, please listen. Randy, please answer the question. Provide a philosophically cogent defense, an actual response that's not arbitrary or subjective for the value and dignity in human beings that you've actually asserted when you have an instance that you brought up of the Holocaust of stardust violating stardust. Okay. In other words, what's wrong with that?
All right, let me say,
feeling violating feeling,
Randy, hold on.
And emotion.
How do we know that the color red exists? Okay, the color red. If you look around in the world, what it requires is actually a subjective interpretation of light. Let's say to see something like redness. Now, I might actually go along with you and say, like, ultimately, there's not a God saying that it's good or bad. So there is a lot of indifference, let's say, in the cosmos. And because there's indifference, what we can say as human beings is because we know what it's like to be, like, punched in the face, or we know what it's like to, have a good nap or have someone who loves you. We have a real feeling through our subjective experience what something is like. Now, and I understand that subjectivity does vary, and people have, some people are homosexuals.
I asked you to give something not based on subjectivity. Your brain gas isn't in charge of other brain gas. And a bag of stardust.
We don't require. We don't require that.
Clarify this. So you're saying there's no reason why we should care about other people?
Jason, respectfully, you've asserted humans have value and dignity, but then you've essentially said that it's brutal, blind, purposeless forces. So you have stardust offending other stardust. So what?
Yeah,
well, from the point of view of the universe, that's true.
Emotions, and we have
so that's true. So you've admitted before this audience that that's true. That's true. Ultimately, it doesn't matter.
It seems to be because if there was a force that cared,
Jason, why are you debating? Why are you debating evil and suffering tonight when you've just admitted before the audience that it doesn't matter?
We know that it's bad. And we know that
it doesn't matter.
It wouldn't be. It matters to us.
We're magic fairies under.
It matters to us.
But your brain gas isn't in charge of other brain gas.
It matters to us, and we can understand that God would know in the exact ways in which it does matter to us.
I'm not asking you about God, Jason. I'm asking about your worldview.
All we care about is to say that the way it is is not compatible with God.
But you do admit you'll admit again that you do admit there's no basis for good or evil in your worldview.
No, I wouldn't say that.
I wouldn't say that at all.
It doesn't matter though.
Yeah, you describe evil. To me, evil is something that you wouldn't want to happen to you. Something like that. Evil is something, but a little bit more than that. It's something that violates a moral principle or something like that.
Could you respond?
Maybe give me more time to think of a definition for that.
Could you respond? Thank you. Thank you, Jason, Randy. Thank you guys for being here.
You said evil could be something that violates a moral principle. Of course, that assumes there are moral principles to be violated. But it seems like that claim's been consistently and repeatedly invalidated by the other side all night, I would say. Earlier, when you guys were talking about sort of how you know stuff, sort of it was like a little bit of a foray into epistemological questions. You said you validate claims through observation. I'm paraphrasing what you said, but I think this is what you're saying.
Depends on the claim.
You look around and validate claims through observation and sensory data, which sounds like empiricism. So you look around, you see, but see, there you're assuming your senses are reliable. You're assuming that there is actually an external world. There's all these assumptions.
Observation is...
Well, hold on.
Let him finish, please.
Please. But you're assuming all these things that I don't think your worldview can prove or give you. You don't have the resources from within your own worldview to say, yes, my sensory data is absolutely reliable. Yes, observation. And even further, the idea of you must, they kind of said you must, you should weigh and evaluate, almost count evidence. Well, on evolution, why? Says who? What's the great law court that says this is the way? Why do I have to do that? First of all, that claim itself can't be empirically verified. You can't say you have to evaluate stuff through empiricist means, and so that doesn't work. But says who? Who says you have to evaluate or fair or do any of that? I would say to even do that, you have to use the absolutely necessary tool of logic. But again, the atheist has a big insurmountable obstacle in that their worldview has no place for logic, which is immaterial, immutable, unchangeable, permanent, objective. I would even say eternal because it's there whether you like it or not. It's not physical. What are the laws of logic on atheism? They're nothing. They can be changed. They can be altered. There's no real reason why logic has to be the determining factor on atheism. But on Christian understanding, God is the Logos. He himself defines right thinking because he only thinks true in thoughts that are veracious. And so, being that is the case, we have a basis for logic. You just use it, really, I think, without our permission. But that's okay, because I want you to use logic along with the regenerated heart to realize that the true living God has spoken through Jesus Christ.
Thank you.
Where you say that we need...
Randy, Jason, Vocab, I appreciate your participation. We've run out of time, but I'm going to go ahead and let each one of you have 1 last minute for closing remarks. Start with Vocab.
Hey, we've been doing, this is the second kind of thing we've done like this. The first one was a little different. It was 2 atheist friends of mine. Maybe I should say friends who are not Christians or something like that, because their atheism to me is not necessarily the most important thing about them, but it was a good thing, and we talked about how Christians and atheists can indeed be friends while still discussing important things. That is true. I know Jason somewhat, I know Randy less, but we don't necessarily have to be enemies. I don't have any animus or anything like that. That's all good. And in fact, I would have concern, really, more for them for anything. But I hope that you guys keep on stopping back by. We're trying to do these things regularly on First Fridays and are looking for more discussions, even sort of debate topics to do like this. And we hope to see you back with that. So Randy and Jason, thank you for joining us. So sort of, you know, you're doing the Max Headroom thing. I know it's a little hard to be sort of on a box in front of everyone, but overall, thanks for being a good sport about it, and thank you guys for being here.
Thank you, too.
Well, thanks for having us, Vocab. There's certainly no animosity on my part either. I mean, obviously, this court is, you know, on your side rather than our side. You know, and you know, I appreciate your thoughts on things.
There's 2 of us, though.
There's 2 of us, though, so that it balance it out. I don't get any brownie points. I don't think I'm getting any good karma if I convince anyone to believe in what we're saying. And honestly, I'm not sure that it's a good thing to advocate what we're talking about. I don't normally do it. The Vocab did ask me because I do post random things on Facebook. It's kind of venting, you could say. But there's no self-interest here for me. I don't get any karma for brownie points or anything. And I try to convey, because we do philosophy, we enjoy real discussions on meaningful topics. So we try to convey, you know, some of our reasons for why we see the things we do, and we appreciate you giving us a chance to talk. And we hope everybody at least got something out of what we were saying, even if you don't agree with it. Thank you.
Thank you to the moderators, Sanjay and Ryan, and everyone who put it together.